Do you live in Venezuela? Do you live in Caracas, in La Guaira, in Yaracuy, in Carabobo, or anywhere across the northern coast of this country? Do you have family there right now, sleeping outside tonight because they are too afraid to go back inside their own homes? If the answer is yes, you need to watch this full video, because what struck Venezuela on Wednesday evening is now confirmed as the most powerful earthquake to hit this country in more than a century, and the death toll is still climbing as rescue crews dig through the rubble. At approximately 6 o'clock in the evening on Wednesday, June 24th, 2026, the ground beneath northern Venezuela ruptured twice in less than a minute. The first earthquake, a magnitude 7. 2 struck at a depth of roughly 13 to 22 kilometers, originating in Yaracuy State, west of Caracas. Just 39 seconds later, before the first shockwave had even finished traveling outward, a second and far more powerful earthquake struck the same general region, magnitude 7. 5, at a shallower depth of approximately 10 kilometers. The United States Geological Survey has described this back-to-back sequence using a specific seismological term, a doublet, 2 major earthquakes occurring in immediate succession, close enough in time and space that they function almost as a single, 2-part catastrophic event. The USGS confirmed this magnitude 7. 5 main shock is the largest earthquake to strike Venezuela since 1900, when a magnitude 7 quake hit the country. This is, by every available measure, the most violent shaking modern Venezuela has experienced in well over 100 years. But here's the problem, and it is the central tragedy unfolding in real time right now. As of this morning, June 25th, Venezuela's acting President Delcy Rodriguez has confirmed that at least 164 people have been killed and 971 others injured. Those numbers are not final. They have already risen sharply once, climbing from an initial overnight count of 32 dead and 700 injured to the current confirmed total within just a matter of hours. And Rodriguez herself has said explicitly that this toll is expected to increase further as rescue and emergency workers continue searching through the rubble. The United Nations Humanitarian Agency has reported that more than 100 buildings collapsed in La Guaira state alone, a coastal region just north of the capital that Rodriguez has formally declared a disaster zone, describing the situation there in her own words as a true tragedy. This next part matters, because the human stories coming out of Caracas right now capture something that statistics alone cannot. A resident named Hector Ricci described the earthquake to reporters, saying it started off gently and then gradually grew, until everyone had to leave their homes, go outside, and gather together in the street, describing the building shaking from side to side with what he called incredible, unreal force. Another Caracas resident, Roberto Damas, said the shaking was tossing people around as they tried to walk, with everything in his apartment falling to the floor. A woman who managed to escape a collapsed building told the Reuters news agency that the scene was like a horror movie, that she had to climb over rubble just to get out. Another survivor, identified only as Maria Alejandra, said simply that all the walls were cracked when the earthquake struck. And one resident who had lived through the infamous 1967 Caracas earthquake, a disaster etched into this country's collective memory, told reporters that what he experienced this week was unlike anything he had ever felt before, even having survived that previous catastrophe decades ago. Here is why this is serious in very specific structural terms. The Chacao municipality of Caracas alone reported 11 confirmed deaths, with 23 people pulled alive from the rubble of at least 3 separate collapsed buildings. In the Los Palos Grandes neighborhood, one of the hardest hit areas of the capital, families of residents from buildings that came down are still waiting for any news of their loved ones as rescue crews work through the debris. A 14-story building was reportedly leveled entirely by the shaking. Venezuela's Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, described what he called alarming situations in the Altamira neighborhood, where homes and apartment buildings collapsed outright, and he urged residents across the capital to remain outside, warning that continuing aftershocks could cause already weakened structures to come down further. Authorities have recorded approximately 20 aftershocks since the initial doublet struck, and USGS modeling indicated in the immediate aftermath a 40% chance that an earthquake of magnitude 6, 0 or greater, would strike the same region again within the following week, a forecast described by USGS seismologist Lucy Jones as pointing toward what she called a severe event. One more thing you need to know about how this disaster has rippled outward from its epicenter. The shaking was felt across a remarkable span of territory, not just throughout Caracas and the surrounding states of Carabobo, Miranda, and La Guaira, but also in Trujillo State to the west. Tremors were reported across Colombia's Caribbean and northeastern regions. In Brazil, more than 1,700 kilometers away, residents in the Amazon cities of Manaus, Belém, and Macapa were evacuated from buildings as the shaking reached that far south. Venezuela's main international airport, Simon Bolivar International Airport outside Caracas, sustained damage severe enough to force its complete closure, an immediate blow to the country's ability to receive international rescue assistance and aid in the critical first hours after a disaster of this scale. Rodriguez announced that schools nationwide would be closed for several days, and the country's Supreme Court of Justice canceled its activities as the government redirected attention entirely toward emergency response. This is where it becomes dangerous in a way that goes far beyond the confirmed death toll released so far. The USGS issued an explicit warning in the immediate aftermath of the doublet, stating plainly that high casualties and extensive damage are probable and that the disaster is likely widespread. The agency's predictive hazard modeling, the same statistical framework used to guide emergency response planning after major earthquakes worldwide, placed a 39% probability on the eventual death toll falling somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 people, and a 37% probability that it could climb even higher, somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000. It is critical to understand exactly what these numbers represent. They are not confirmed casualty figures. They are statistical projections built from historical patterns of building vulnerability and population exposure in earthquake disasters of comparable magnitude, designed specifically to help responders scale their efforts appropriately in the crucial early days when the true scope of destruction is still unknown. The USGS has also pointed directly to why this particular disaster carries such elevated risk. Many buildings across the affected region are constructed from unreinforced brick masonry and adobe, mud brick construction that is particularly vulnerable to catastrophic collapse during strong shaking. A structural reality that historically separates earthquakes that cause modest damage from earthquakes that cause mass casualties. Now the focus shifts to the historical comparison that every single resident of Caracas who lived through it is thinking about right now. On July 29, 1967, an earthquake measuring magnitude 6 struck the region west of Caracas, killing somewhere between 225 and 300 people and injuring over 1,500 more. That disaster became one of the defining tragedies in Venezuela's modern history, and the comparison to this week's doublet is sobering precisely because of how much smaller that 1967 earthquake actually was. The 1967 quake disproportionately destroyed Caracas's newer, taller buildings, leveling 4 10 to 12-story apartment towers, built just a few years earlier in the affluent Altamira and Los Palos Grandes neighborhoods, while smaller, more traditional homes nearby suffered comparatively little damage, a stark demonstration of how modern high-rise construction techniques at the time had failed to account for the specific way Caracas's soft valley sediments amplify seismic shaking. That same geological amplification effect, the Caracas Valley's thick layers of alluvial sediment trapping and intensifying ground motion, is almost certainly playing a significant role in the destruction unfolding across these same neighborhoods again this week, 59 years later, in an earthquake that, at magnitude 7.5, released dramatically more energy than the 1967 disaster ever did. Beyond 1967, Venezuela's seismic history includes an even more catastrophic precedent, the 1812 earthquake that devastated both Caracas and Mérida, killing an estimated 30,000 people and remaining to this day one of the deadliest earthquakes ever recorded in this country's history. Most people outside Venezuela are missing just how unusual an earthquake of this magnitude actually is for this specific stretch of coastline. According to USGS historical records, there have been only a small handful of magnitude 7 or greater earthquakes along Venezuela's northern coast or in the country's interior since 1900. This region sits along a complex transform boundary where the Caribbean and South American tectonic plates grind against each other in an oblique, sideways motion rather than a head-on collision, a tectonic setting that produces powerful earthquakes, but historically less frequently than the more famous subduction zones ringing the Pacific. That relative rarity is part of why this disaster carries such outsized danger. A region that experiences major magnitude 7 class earthquakes only once every several decades inevitably accumulates buildings, infrastructure, and a population that have not been continuously tested or reinforced against this level of shaking. Precisely the vulnerability the USGS flagged when warning that unreinforced masonry construction across the affected area could not withstand a doublet of this scale. Here's why this is serious for what comes next, in the most immediate practical sense. The Venezuelan Red Cross has stated that the most urgently needed resources right now are emergency shelters for families whose homes have been damaged or destroyed. Urgent medical care including trauma, treatment, and psychosocial support, and safe water, sanitation, and essential household supplies. International assistance is already arriving. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed that American search and rescue teams have been deployed from Fairfax County, Virginia, and from Los Angeles, alongside satellite overhead imagery support specifically aimed at helping Venezuelan authorities assess damage in coastal areas where visibility on the ground remains limited. President Trump stated that the earthquakes were both massive in scale and had left a devastating number of deaths, instructing his administration to assist Venezuela's response. Rubio described search and rescue through the collapsed buildings as the country's single most immediate need, acknowledging that Venezuela's main airport remains too damaged to support a full-scale international relief operation without additional logistical support. One more thing you need to know about the human toll still unfolding inside the rubble right now. In Falcon State, west of Caracas, Governor Victor Clark reported that, as of several hours after the earthquake struck, rescue workers were still searching for 15 people believed trapped beneath collapsed structures, with 32 others already hospitalized from injuries sustained in that state alone. Venezuelan authorities have urged residents across the country to remain calm, to check on family members, and especially the elderly and children, and to stay inside their homes only if those homes remain structurally sound. A careful, conditional instruction that reflects the genuine uncertainty still surrounding how many more buildings across Caracas and La Guaira may yet prove unsafe to occupy. Interior Minister Cabello has repeated in multiple public statements that emergency protocols are being followed as closely as possible, even as desperation mounts among residents searching for missing loved ones, urging patience, even as rescue crews work as quickly as they can through reinforced concrete and twisted rebar in search of survivors. This is where it becomes dangerous in a way that extends well beyond today's headlines. Significant aftershocks are considered likely to continue striking this region in the coming days, and Venezuelan officials have explicitly warned that these aftershocks pose a direct, ongoing risk of causing further damage or outright collapse to buildings that survived Wednesday's doublet but were left structurally weakened by it. This is precisely the same mechanism that has played out in earthquake disasters across the world throughout this entire reporting season. A powerful main shock event, followed by an extended aftershock sequence capable of bringing down already compromised structures that the initial earthquake did not fully destroy. For the residents of Caracas and La Guaira sleeping outside tonight, afraid to return to apartments and homes with visible new cracks running through their walls, that fear is not an overreaction. It is a rational response to a documented, well-understood seismic hazard that experts are actively warning could continue for days or weeks to come. The atmosphere across Venezuela tonight is one of shock, grief, and a desperate ongoing search for the missing. Caracas, in the words of one resident who survived the night, looked somber and quiet by morning, with people still sleeping outside, still feeling the aftershocks roll through, still unsure whether the worst has truly passed. Acting President Rodriguez has called for national unity, asking citizens to act with calm and solidarity as the country confronts what she has called a tragedy that the nation will overcome together. But the scale of what has happened here, the largest earthquake to strike Venezuela in over a century, a confirmed death toll already past 164 and still climbing, more than 100 buildings reduced to rubble in La Guaira alone, and USGS hazard models warning the true toll could ultimately run into the thousands or higher, means that the coming days will be defined not by recovery, but by the continued urgent work of finding the people still buried beneath what used to be their homes. We will know more as Venezuelan authorities and international rescue teams continue working through the wreckage in Caracas and across La Guaira state. But right now, this needs to be taken seriously by anyone with connections to this region. The aftershocks have not stopped. The death toll has not stopped climbing. And somewhere beneath the rubble of Altamira, El Paraíso, and the collapsed apartment towers of La Guaira, rescue crews are still searching for anyone who might still be found alive.